I think once you lift your grief a little bit, because our loved ones are always trying to communicate with us. They're always trying to communicate with us. But sometimes when you're in this deep grief, they're like kind of like knocking on you, like, hello, I'm here, but you're not hearing me. Then I finally said to him, hey, okay, since you passed from the heart, send me hearts. And I get everything from heart rocks to heart clouds to I was cutting a lemon and a lemon seed flew out and it came in the shape of a heart. Last weekend, I was cutting cauliflower and a piece flew out on the counter. And I looked at my husband. He goes, oh my gosh, that's a heart. So ask your loved ones for signs and pay attention.
Welcome to the Light the Day podcast, where we explore spiritually transformative experiences. I'm your host, Julie Clough, and I'd like to welcome to the show my friend Lisa Diacik. And I still didn't say it right.
Diacik.
Diacik. Oh my gosh, you're not the first. This is going to be like how I am known on this show is I mispronounce everybody's last name. So we're just going to move forward. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Lisa.
So my name is Lisa Diacik and I live in Central Arizona. I've been here for about 13 years, originally from the East Coast. And most recently, I'm on an unbelievable spiritual journey.
Yeah. So let's go before the unbelievable spiritual journey. And what was life like before everything changed for you really a couple of years ago?
Right. So I worked in corporate. I was a manager and it was kind of a very stressful job. And I didn't have really much time for anything else but work. We were renovating our house. We're still renovating our house. So we were into those projects. Life was very busy and just there wasn't a lot of free time. We had to schedule, we had to schedule like Sunday fun days and things like that. So life was very different, so to speak, very left-brained, practical, all about, hey, you got to get the bills paid, your retirement, you plan for the future, all of that. And I was kind of always interested though in spiritual stuff. Like now that I look back, like I had some old books, I was drawn to Sedona, Arizona, where I live about 30 minutes south from there. So obviously that was something that drew me. And anybody that knows about Sedona, it's a very spiritual place. And so I had a lot of books about that and a lot of books about shamans and things like that. So when I look back, I think it's always been an interest for me. But, and obviously, in the last 2 years when I started this new journey, it's become much more forefront in my life.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting when you, like you said, when you look back, you can see the interest there, but life just has a way of just edging out all those types of things because got to pay the bills, got to show up for work, got to, all the left brain stuff, like you said. And I'm sure there's a lot of people listening right now who can appreciate that, that life. That's the way it goes in modern America, which is where we happen to be. Exactly. So what's changed for you 2 years ago?
So on August 4th, 2022, my son transitioned. He was almost 25, a month and a half. His birthday, September 19th. So almost 25. And immediately, well, actually before I knew he passed away, I had an intuition that something was wrong. And I felt his spirit come in to my, I happened to be in the dental chair. I was getting a dental cleaning and I don't like the dentist. I have a little bit of phobia from a kid. And so when I was in the dental chair, I was like, oh, why am I feeling Jared? This is odd. But Jared had always had a lot of health issues. He was born with a rare heart defect called hypoplastic left heart. He had a heart transplant at 4 months of age. He also had cancer at age 16
Wow.
and that was stage 4. Beat that naturally. He went against conventional medicine at that time. And so I just thought, because whenever we were like in a situation like at a doctor's appointment we didn't want, or a test that we didn't want, or a dental exam that I didn't want, I would always be like, oh, Jared can, if Jared did all this, I can get through it. So my human mind was saying, oh, you're just thinking about Jared because you're trying to get past this, dental cleaning, if you will. So
Right.
I kind of excused that away until it started happening more and more and more after we found out that he had transitioned.
Wow. So so you're sitting in this dental chair, you're feeling him. At what point did you find out that what you were feeling was because he had passed?
It was the next day. So I was in the chair and I felt like a swirl around me, like his spirit. It felt like a tornado. And I was just like, what am I feeling? It's odd. And, I was just sitting there and I'm like, I gotta call Jared, so I got done. And you know how you can voice text like on iPhones. And
Mhm.
so I was like, we used to do that all the time, him and I. And so I so like after I got done, I was like, hey, Jared, I was just thinking about, yeah, I said, mom was in the dental chair and you know how I don't like the dentist. Hey, let me know how your day's going. And I just left it at that. He lived about 45 minutes from us. He had like a mother daughter type house where his friends lived like right next door. And he had like this little studio apartment. And, he was just getting on his own and he was healthy. And, I was trying to be the mom to like, okay, you got to let go because you can imagine. I mean, you would, by looking at him, you would never think he was a special needs child. There was like no, physical signs, but technically he was because, we always had to watch out for medications and supplements. And so I was always going, I was always on, if you will, like, my
Yeah.
radar was always on. In
Yeah.
fact, when he would visit, and I knew when he was coming in the kitchen, I didn't even hear him. And I would be like, hey, what's up? Like if I was lying in bed and he would have to go past the room, he'd be like, how did you know that? And I'm like, I don't know. I just felt that you were coming. So we always had that kind of relationship like that. We were just so in tune. Um, Much more different than, my relationship with my other kids, because I think it was because of the health challenges, right? And I had to be with him in the hospital and things. So when I look back, we had other, there was a time when he was in the hospital and he was having a test done, and I felt my arm ache. And um, I said to the nurse, I said, I think his IV is leaking. And she goes, oh, it's not leaking. And then she walked away. And a second later, I started seeing his IV leak.
Wow.
So it's like those kind of things I think we always were in tune with. But getting back to your question, so um, I let it go because I got home and my husband and my older son was visiting at the time. They're like, Mom, you're overprotective. He's on his own. Everything's fine. Don't worry about him. And I was like, okay, yeah, you're right. He's probably hiking with his friends. He was a very free spirit, and I was thinking he probably doesn't even have his phone on him. And so I let it go. And then the next morning, I voice messaged him again and I didn't hear anything. Now, I know because I know my son, he knows I worry. And so I said to my older son, I said, if we don't hear back from him by this afternoon after work, because we were both working from the home at the time, I said, I'm going there. And I said, because this is odd. He always answers me like maybe, not for a few hours, but now we've talked almost 24 hours. So that morning is when I realized that I was hearing him because my husband was off that day. And he said, hey, hun, can I grab your Jeep? I'm just going to run to the hardware store. I said, sure. And within 5 minutes, he was back. And I saw him pull in the driveway. And I said to my older son, I said, oh my gosh, I'm like, something's wrong. Um, and I said, take yourself offline. And I saw my husband running towards our back gate, screaming and crying. And he had left the driver door open. So I immediately thought he got into an accident or injured himself. And I still can remember hearing that metal gate open in the back. And he ran and I said, are you okay? And he said, I'm so sorry, hun, Jared's gone. He's dead. And I said, no, he's not. And his friends had got a hold of my husband. Now that I know what I know, because his friends have told me everything, they it's actually such an amazing story because his friends saw him that morning. Jared did not have to work that day. So he went back to his place to make a cup of tea. They were going to get together for dinner. And when they checked on him at dinner time, he had laid on his bed and he was gone. And it was some sort of ventricular, I forget the name of it, but basically because he had the heart transplant, it was like basically electrical impulses in his heart. And he just, what the cardiologist said is what probably happened is he just sat in his bed, felt a little dizzy, the oxygen gets cut off immediately, and you're gone. So as a mom, and after researching and looking at his phone and figuring out what time he passed, and I kind of was able to narrow that down between when he usually took his heart medication and things like that. But when the police got there and they realized there was no foul play, they said that they would contact us, and they had our address, and because his friends were going to contact us, and they said, no, we'll do that. They sent out a grief coach to all of them because they were all together, of course, very upset and shock. And the police never came to our home.
Wow.
They never came to our home. It was my son's bedroom. My older son that was visiting, his bedroom was up front of the house. Our bedroom was in the back. And we have dogs, and our dogs will bark even if the mailman goes by, and nobody ever came to our house. And we can't figure out what happened. Because, if a police officer comes to the door, they're not just going to tap lightly. They're going to bang on the door.
Right.
And we never got them. We don't know if they went to the wrong house. We have no idea, even though you would think they would follow up. But now that I know what I know, I believe that Jared blocked them from coming because he's told me that I needed to sleep that night because I wasn't going to sleep for weeks after that. And there's no explanation for why they didn't come. I was very tired after the dental appointment, even though it was just a cleaning. I went to bed at 7 o'clock that night and I slept so soundly. I have never slept that good. Wow. And when I woke up and I got this news around 9 o'clock on a Friday morning, that's when I started realizing, well, why didn't the police come and why didn't people notify us? And so none of Jared's friends, because a lot of them are women and our mothers, they didn't want to call another mother to tell them that their child had passed. So one of them mustered up the guts to call my husband, and because obviously it was, his number was in Jared's phone, and they were shocked to know that we didn't know. They were like, the police were supposed to come. What do you mean you didn't know?
Wow.
And so I was, hysterical. Where is he? What happened? I didn't know anything. But when I think back on this and what Jared has told me, I would have been hysterical. I would have tried to, this is nighttime. I would have went to the morgue. I would have said I wanted to see my son. He was already taken from his home, and there would have been nothing I could have done till morning anyway. I had, so it was really a blessing the way, now that I know, and now that I learned, through classes and all of our spiritual classes and stuff, now I've learned, now I see why this happened the way it happened. It happened the way it was supposed to happen. And Jared always, he never wanted to die back in the hospital. He always wanted to do it his own way. And I believe he did that purposely.
Yeah.
We should pause now.
Yeah.
Let's pause for a second. Ruby.
We took a quick little dog barking break and we're back. Go ahead, Lisa. You were talking about Jared's desire to not die in a hospital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he now that I've, now we're talking 2 years ago. So his friends, I had a lot of questions for his friends, and they have been great because the more questions that I got answered, the more healing, right? You want to know, well, why did this happen? And how did this was this? And they were very close-knit friends. And his one friend had told me about, so my birthday is July 22nd. So I had just seen him. I took both my boys down to Phoenix, and we had this great time. We went out to eat. We did something called the Smash Room, which is a really cool thing to do. So I had just seen Jared, and he looked great. I mean, healthy. In fact, I took a picture of him in my back garden, and I'll never forget this. He's like, "How do I look, Mom?" And he's like, and I'm like, "You look beautiful, Jared." Like, he just looked the picture of health. So, and, we forgot that there was health challenges because he was so healthy, I mean, he looked healthy. He, healed himself from cancer. There was really no worries, but I guess in between my birthday and then his transition date of August 4th, his friends noticed that his ankles were swelling. And they had said something to him like, "Jared, did you tell Mom your ankles, are swelling?" And he was like, I'll be okay. I'm going to do some yoga. I'm going to put my legs up. But Jared was very smart. I mean, he knew that that swelling had to do with his heart. So there was probably something going on with his heart. And he would tell his friends, I don't want to bother my mom. I don't want to go to the doctor. Like, I think he was just done with all of that.
Mm,
And I think he knew. I honestly think he knew. Um, there was another weird sign too, which, I don't know. I kind of feel like when you're close to going, or there's some little signs. I mean, I don't know how you feel about that, Julie, but
I think so too.
yeah,
Absolutely. Because our
because it,
soul knows, our
right.
soul plan. Yeah.
Yes. And I because it was July 9th, he was pet sitting for us. And speaking of the dog that was barking, and we rescued her off of the Navajo Nation out here, and she was very sick. And I was just going to foster this dog. And I'm like, no, we're getting it home. We've had animal rescue. I've worked with animals for years in different modalities. And Jared was there and he said, Mom, you have to keep this dog. She will bring you balance. And I said, no, Jared, we're not having another dog. And it was such an odd statement, less than a month before his transition. Well, P.S. After he transitioned, we ended up keeping her, and she's been the best dog. And when I cried and I laid in bed, she licked my tears. She didn't leave me. She even
Wow.
does like that dog smile. And she is just so thankful. And when I look back at that, I felt like he knew I was going to need that dog, for him to say that less than a month and for him to, and then he said it again. I'm like, Jared, we're not keeping the dog. He goes, all right, suit yourself. But I'm telling you, bring you balance. So yeah, it was very interesting how it had all came about. And I think his soul knew that he was
Yeah.
transitioning and he didn't want any more medical treatment. I mean, he's visually shown me what would have happened if he would have stayed. He's taken me through a lot of that. So I understand.
Wow. There's a couple of things that you mentioned that I just want to emphasize. Is one is the questions that we have when someone passes, and that just insatiable desire to understand what happened. Were there questions that you had that there were no answers for? Because I find that most of the time there are questions like we have to. There's a point at which we get the questions answered that we can get answered, and then there's a point at which we let go of questions. There's a point at which we have enough information to be able to move forward. I'm just wondering if that was your experience too.
Um, no, I was pretty OCD about all the questions getting answered. And I think that comes from all his health challenges, right? Like I
Right.
knew every one of his meds, I knew every one of his doses, and that's why I was even like looking in this phone and I'm like, okay, the last time he opened that phone was at 9:04 and he didn't take his 9 o'clock meds. So chances are he passed in the morning, somewhere right around that time. You know, I had to get, the only question unanswered is the police department. I've thought about calling them and being like, hey, back on this date, somebody was supposed to, blah, blah, blah. But I'm like, it doesn't matter now that he's
Right.
told me. So yeah, for something like that, I would think that would be the only one. And it was gnawing on me for a while until he came to me and told me why. So maybe if I didn't hear from Jared, um, but hearing from him makes it so much easier, which I'm sure you agree.
Absolutely. And your experience is so unique. I remember we actually met, I haven't shared this yet, but we actually met in a mediumship course. And when you shared that your son had just transitioned 2 years ago, I'm like, I was still in bed at that point when my kids died. Like I was functioning, but I was still in very deep grief and still in a lot of pain and still in a lot of questions and and trying to figure things out and trying to figure out how to move forward at that point. And you're at just such a different place. And I don't want to minimize the pain that you experience because certainly there's so much pain in that physical separation.
Hmm.
Even when we have the answers, there's so
Right.
much pain that needs to alchemize in our body, in our
Hmm.
system. And I just think it's so beautiful, and it makes so much sense because you had such a unique relationship here. It makes so much sense that then when he passed, that type of connection, you already had a spiritual connection. and
Hmm.
and and I want to say, like, we have spiritual connections with our kids no matter what, but there was a unique aspect of your connection with him because of his health problems, because of that responsibility that you had to take for him, for his health, for his, the decisions and so forth. So it makes so much sense that immediately you felt him. And I also want to just kind of point out this aspect of it is because sometimes, and when I've worked with people, often I've had people say, well, I felt my son, or I felt my daughter, or I felt my mom, but like I'm not quite sure.
Hmm.
And I just I want to just invite anybody that's listening that has had that experience where you felt that person with you, but then you questioned it, that it makes sense that you felt them and you knew who it was because you knew them here. So when they
Hmm.
come back and the essence of who they are is with you, you will feel that familiarity.
Hmm.
And so I really appreciate that piece of your story. Also, this the dog will bring you balance. I have found that even though there's an aspect of us that knows when it's our time, or knows, because I had that experience with my daughter, left pictures and different things that happened, that was like I knew that she knew. And also looking back, for the month before my kids passed away, I had situations that happened that let me know afterwards that my soul knew before it was even happening. So it's like,
Hmm.
why do I feel this way? There's no reason for me to feel this way. It's like almost like pre-grief without knowing what the
Yeah.
grief is. Um, but the just this idea that he said the dog will bring you balance, he may not have even understood completely why he was saying that. Like he sensed that and felt that, but whether or not he actually knew that it was his time, or just that his this soul, at the soul level, he knew. I just think it's so beautiful when we can look at these really painful situations and we can see it from a higher perspective. So I really appreciate you sharing this higher perspective with us.
Well, I do want to say, Julie, I mean, it's what, 2 years and a few months, and I mean, I have my moments, and I'm sure you still do too. I think losing a child, or in your case, unfortunately, too, we it defines you as a before and after, doesn't it? Like, I mean, I remember for weeks my heart hurt, and I have never experienced that before. Like, I mean, I've had obviously loss in my life, and my mom is on the other side, and her and I were very close. But when I lost Jared, I literally felt my heart breaking. Like, I thought I was having a heart attack. I'm like, okay, if I'm having a heart attack, just take me, because this is such. So I remember waking up in the morning, and you wake up and you're like, oh God, I thought it was a dream. And you're like, it's not a dream. And I got to go on, and I have to wake up, and I have to survive, and I have other kids. And, you know, um, it was, it, the way I can describe it, honestly, when I talk to, other people and help other people through grief, they're like, oh my gosh, I experienced that too. That feeling in the heart that just feels like it's breaking. And it wasn't until his almost year anniversary. I plan, you try to do like something right every year on their transition day, of course. And I had planned a trip down in Tucson, in southern Arizona, to meet some of his friends that had moved down there. And we all got together and we were going to sprinkle a little of his ashes. And I got like a Verbo, and it was a real nice house with a pool. And I was getting ready down there. And my heart was still feeling that way almost a year later. And I had gotten to the house before everybody else. And I was talking to Jared, and he's telling me where to put things. And I was putting his pictures everywhere. And he was like, Mom, your heart does not have to hurt anymore because I'm in there. I'm with you. I am going to disperse the pain. And I remember sitting by the pool by myself, waiting for people to get there. And it was like it just absorbed. So I do still have moments, right? And, we're never, even though we hear from our kids, it's not the same. When I sit and think, oh my gosh, I am never, ever going to see him in this lifetime again. Never wrap my arms around him. Never call him my Gerudy. That was his nickname. He used to send me silly little text messages and Facebook messages. Oh, hey mom, this is what the planets are doing. Cause he was my spiritual guy. Like he was all into all that, he was always telling me, well, there's your Aries moon coming out, for almost a 25-year-old, he was a very old soul. And so, I just want to say respectively that I still have moments, but I know that him coming to me is why I'm still here and why I'm still functioning. And that's what he told me. He told me that when he got to the other side, he said that he had a conversation, and first he said, I had no pain. I was just going up and up and up, and it was so great. And he used to meditate all the time and everything. So he probably thought he was just going out of body again. And so he probably did feel like that. Like he was so excited. And he said when he got to the other side, he was given a choice if he wanted to come back. And he was shown what he could do there or what could happen here. And he decided to stay because he felt like he could help more people on the other side as long as he could come to me, because he said my mom is going to need it. So that to me, obviously he knew I probably wouldn't survive without that, and we all have the ability to do it, right? I mean, we know that in our mediumship class, it's just practicing and learning. But Jared has, he's the one that kind of started me, on this serious journey to help other people.
Right. And again, it's such a unique, like when I heard your story, I was like, oh my, people need to hear this story for so many reasons. But I will say that it was several years before I learned to really communicate with my kids over on the other side. But this has changed, and like anything like this would change someone's life. Mm-hmm. But this has changed your life in more than just going through grief. It has changed the trajectory of your life and your life purpose and what you do. Share a little bit about, because I remember you saying one time, it's Jared that had me quit my corporate job. Like, share a little bit about how that transition happened and where you are now with all that.
So he has he passed away in August. And I started taking some spiritual classes because, okay, you can picture this, right? I'm hearing a voice in my head, and it's him, it's his voice. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I'm just a crazy mom. Like I'm just wishing my son back into, this lifetime. And I'll never forget when we were going to the funeral home to make his plans. My husband was in the car and he was driving. And I said, hold on, I'll be right back. Stop the car. We were pulling out of the driveway. He's like, what's going on? I'm like, Jared's talking to me. I need to write stuff down. And he was like, what? And I'm like, yeah, I got to go. And my older son was in the back, which again, another serendipitous moment is that my older son was about to fly back. He lived in Vegas at the time. And when we found out, he was supposed to fly back the next day, and he was still there. If he would have flown back, it would have been chaos to try to get him back and everything else like that. So it was almost like Jared had it all set up, where I had my older son visiting at home so he could comfort me. And, my husband was off that day. And so, but getting back to the story. So when I was pretty sure it was him, I started taking some spiritual classes in between my full-time job. So Suzanne Giesman, I've taken several of her classes, Marie Manucherry, James Van Prague. I just started like dipping into some classes and just learning a little bit about could I hear him? Could I really be hearing him? And then my corporate job got very stressful. Jared never always used to tell me, Mom, you should be doing something you love. You should be, and he was always a free spirit. And I was like, Jared, I gotta pay the electric bill. Okay. Like, that type of stuff. And so it was just getting, more and more and more intense. And I'm sure you agree with this, when you go through such a tragic loss, you start to think, what's really important in your life? Like, I don't really care if my electric gets shut off. I don't really care if I finish the renovations on our house. I don't really care, because you become really in tune with what's really important, right?
Mm.
And so I was watching a webinar, and just trying to learn more, about and writing everything down he's telling me to do. He actually planned his whole celebration of life. He told me what to write. He told me what books to get out of, like things out of. And he said, I want you to read this from this book, open this page. And I'm like, I can't read this, Jared. He said, you can, and you will. He said, you know how people do sermons like from the Bible and things like that, and eulogies and stuff. He goes, this is just like a sermon. I want you to read this from this book and do this and play this song. And because he had a whole Spotify account, he was known for his love of music of all genres. And so I was already pretty positive that I was talking to him. And especially after the celebration of life, because his friends started coming up to me and they're like, how did you know that? Like, that was for me. And I was like, Jared told me. And they're like, oh my gosh, he is really talking to you, because I didn't know a lot of these things about, his friends. And as I was writing it, doing this automatic writing with him, I was like, why am I writing this? And he's like, just write it, Mom, just write it. Like, so it was like he had messages for like all his friends that arrived. And we had his celebration of life at his favorite park and things like that. So after the celebration of life, I was like, okay, I have this validation that I am really hearing from his friends are telling me, so now I know I'm not crazy. And then slowly things started happening in the house. Like, I started sensing him, and our one dog freaks out every time he comes around. And lights would go on and off. The TV turned on, and it happened to be his Netflix account just flashed across the screen, like things like that I knew it was him fooling around, because he's a jokester. So well, when I was pretty positive, so he passed in August, and it was probably actually it was right around his birthday. He came in as clear as day and said, Mom, you got to quit your job. And I'm like, and I just knew, I was starting to get stressed, and stress can do a lot to your health. And I was already, obviously I was going through the trauma of losing Jared. And I'm like, I don't really care about this job or anything else really, for that matter, except to learn more about the other side. Mm. And so I started watching this webinar.
How many months was this after his passing?
So it was over a year. So it was okay. 11 months. 11 months. Yeah.
Okay.
11 months. Okay. So then the webinar came to my email, and it was about, take this class, and you gotta apply, and blah blah blah. And I'm looking at it, and I'm watching the webinar, which is where you and I met, Julie, in that class. And it said this class starts January whatever. Well, the time right before I sat down to watch this webinar, because I even told my husband, okay, I'm going into my office, which this is Jared's old room, and we renovated into my office. And I said, I'm going to go in and shut the door and watch this webinar. And as soon as I sat down to turn it on, I heard Jared say, you need to leave your job by January. And so it was funny, because when they got done with their spiel, what did they say? This class starts in January. If you do, and once you apply, if you're accepted, it starts in January. And I'm like, that's why he wants me to leave, because I didn't know how I was going to work full time, take the class, and you have to be present for the class, you have to practice, there's certain times you have to be on Zoom and on camera. And I'm like, how am I going to do all this and work full time and juggle all this? And because they talk about that you have to be present, and I was like, normally that's my work hours at my old job. And so I was like, I'm just doing it. And so I gave my notice, and I just for the past 2 years, I've really been on a spiritual journey of total trust. total trust of what he wants me to do, what he's telling me to do. And it's not easy because, our human brain, our ego is like, what are you doing? And then I'm like, no, I know, we're all here for a life purpose, right? And I know we agree upon that. And I just feel like I'm finally on my life's purpose. I've had shimmers and I had blinks of where I should have been, but as a mom, you understand, and you get busy with your kids and your career and everything else. And so it's always been, that light has always been dimmed. So now I feel like I'm finally living that life's purpose. And Jared has told me if he was still here, I would not be doing that, which he's right.
Yeah. Well, and I will say that, when you're taking care of your kids and doing all that, that was your life's purpose, right?
Sure.
And then things shift and change, and then it's almost like and I've seen this in my own life. In fact, at one point, in my own experience of shifting what I was doing and the direction I was going, and I remember kind of speaking to God saying, why am I just now finding, because I'm like an old lady,
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, why am I just now finding this path? Why am I just now finding my purpose? And I heard, you've always been living your purpose. And I
Mm-hmm.
really feel that's true. I really feel like the things that come before, even when we move forward and we feel even a more connection to what we're doing, and we're like, this feels so good. I'm going in the right direction. I'm on the right path. That the experiences that we had before is actually informing the path that we're on now. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's beautiful to kind of look at it and see how the things that you learn, even in a corporate job, that you're like, but like you said, priorities change. You wake
Mm-hmm.
up and you go, what is really important to me? What do I really want to be doing? This is just beautiful, and this idea of total trust. And yet you also have free will. You can choose into this or not, and you've just gone fully into it and doing such a beautiful job. What has surprised you on this journey? Among a dozen things, I think.
What surprised me?
Yeah.
Um, hmm, I thought it would be easier.
Mm,
Um, I thought that, like, um, so I hear Jared, obviously, and I always thought, oh, okay, if I can hear Jared, I'm just going to start talking to all these other people on the other side, right? And then your human mind gets in the way, and I'm like, I'm going to be a medium full time, and I'm going to help people. Well, okay, Lisa, but you have to create a website, you have to talk to people, you have to, and so I'm like, oh, I had a website in the past, now I got to create a website, now, and so it just felt like it was going to be easier, maybe that it was going to fall into place easier. Um, but now through the class that we're taking and realizing that everything I'm learning is a stepping stone and I have to do it this way, kind of like what you said about you're always living your life's purpose. Like, I went to a year of nursing school. My parents wanted me to be a nurse and I did not want to be a nurse, and I dropped out after a year, and it was just, I'm glad I did. However, I learned a lot, and I was a nurse to my son for many years, so here I'm like, oh, that's why I did that. Oh, that's why I did this. So I really believe that, like you said, where you're at is where you're supposed to be at that time. So I guess I just thought it was going to be easier. And it's not easy to, and this, some readings are very easy. And some people that are on the other side is kind of like, all right, I'm pulling teeth here. Like, what's the message and things like that. So um, I enjoy learning, and I'm one of those people that feel like I can never, like, I'm never done, right? There's always more we can learn. And so I just feel like, I guess that answer to that would be, I thought it was going to be easier. I just thought things were going to fall into place and I was going to hear from all sorts of people on the other side, and be able to just look over there and see that person and see who's around them. But it is a skill like any other profession. It really is. And I know you probably definitely agree with that because we've been in this class for a year.
yeah. Yeah. Well, and I will say you do make it look easy. So
I don't feel that way.
there is that part.
I don't feel that way.
Yeah. Well, and I love that perspective. And I think what you said about it being a skill, like any direction we feel called into, there is the learning curve, there is the development, there is the practice, there's really nothing that we go into, even if we have natural abilities or natural interest, or that we don't have to develop in some way.
Right.
And I think that's really important to recognize. But I also think it's important to just recognize that, like, if you're listening to this right now and you're like, well, I had someone close to me pass, but I'm not feeling a call to be a medium, that's okay. Or I'm not feeling a call to do this or that or the other. We are all unique. And if everyone was mediums, what would we eat? And if everyone was farmers, who would entertain us? You know what I mean? It's like we're all meant to be on our own path and our own unique path. And that's one of the reasons I love doing this show, is because I get to talk to so many people with such unique paths. And yours is a beautiful path, and a hard but a beautiful story of how you got to where you are. Just what a lovely, like, I just feel this partnership with you and your son. Like
Yeah, and he actually said that, Julie, to me. I was outside about 4 or 5 months after he passed, and we did a lot of public speaking together when he beat cancer naturally. We were all over like the internet and all this stuff, and we went to different states and spoke on stage, and so we were educating people on natural health. And so my life was spent so much with him on all sorts of levels that I didn't know who I was anymore. When he left, I was like, who am I? What's my purpose? And I was standing outside one day and I was just looking up at the sky, and I'm like, all right, Jared, give me a sign, because he always gives me all sorts of signs. And I heard him come in and he said, Mom, we're not done yet. He's like, we're helping people together in another way. We're going to help people together in another way. And I was like, okay, I got it. Um, so, thank you for that. Cause that's what I feel like, even though, you wish he was here, of course, but I know he's here helping me, and we're helping people together.
That's wonderful. So tell people where they can find you, because I know there's going to be people listening that are going to be like, oh, I want to connect with Lisa. Where's a good place to connect with you?
So I have a Facebook page, and I also have a YouTube, and I also have my website, and it's called sendingspiritslove.com. Jared named it. He just said Sending Spirits Love, and I was like, oh, okay. So my website is sendingspiritslove.com, and I'm in the process, under his direction, of writing our story. So it was really difficult for me to start, because you have to talk about the death, right? You have to talk about the rebirth, I want to call it. But and once I got past that, which had taken me months, he's been asking me to finish it, because it's part of the things that are the stepping stones of where he wants me to be. So I do grief coaching. I'm obviously passionate, I'm sure, like you, with helping parents. And if I could mention that group, Julie, for if parents are listening, there is an amazing group. If you are fascinated about what Julie and I are talking about, it's called Helping Parents Heal. It's all over. They have a conference every 2 years in Phoenix. I went to my first one, and it was amazing. Many different mediums, many different inspirational speakers. The first time I ever felt accepted in a very long time, because even though, all these children passed away in different ways and different losses, we all have one common denominator in that room, and that was we all lost a child. So you could sit down with these people and have dinner, and they got you. They understand. And so for anybody that is experiencing what Julie and I have and the loss we have, look them up, because there's support groups all over. and you don't have to be here in Arizona, and they have different spiritual events. They do sound healing sessions. The speakers in the conference are just amazing, but they do a lot of online events. So even if you don't live near where one, they have tons of online events, and they have Facebook pages, they have book recommendations. They're just a wealth of information. So, there are groups out there, and that's the group that I felt accepted in.
Yeah, I love the work that they do as well, because it's all about connecting us to the afterlife, to understanding that there is something beyond here and now. And it normalizes what you're talking about. After death communication is what is often termed as. It normalizes that. It makes you feel less crazy. Like you said,
Yeah.
not only were you in an audience that had lost children, but you're in an audience that's receptive to the idea of after death communication, that's receptive to the idea of afterlife. The work they're doing is really beautiful and wonderful. So
You could see the difference from the beginning of that conference to the end, and you make lifelong friends. And my husband is, and he's not going to mind me saying this, very introverted. We're two polar opposites, which is probably why we work. And he just got so much out of the conference. And it's people will come in, from like, we had some from Australia and England. I mean, people come from all over to attend that conference, and it sells out quick. So their next one won't be in for 2 years, but when the tickets go on sale, get them. And they have even scholarship programs for people that can't afford, they help you. So it's just, yeah, I agree with you. It's a great, great organization. If I could mention one more thing, Julie,
sure.
about signs for loved ones, I know you agree with this. I think once you lift your grief a little bit, because our loved ones are always trying to communicate with us. They're always trying to communicate with us. But sometimes when you're in this deep grief, they're like kind of like knocking on you, like, hello, I'm here, but you're not hearing me. So pay attention to those little signs, because originally when Jared had transitioned and I was like, okay, give me that shooting star, and I wouldn't get it, I'd be like, all right. But then the next day I would see like a heart cloud in the sky, or I would find, a feather. Or then I finally said to him, hey, okay, since you passed from the heart, send me hearts. And I get everything from heart rocks to heart clouds to, I have even like a whole album of, I was cutting a lemon and a lemon seed flew out and it came in the shape of a heart. Last weekend I was cutting cauliflower and a piece flew out on the counter, and I looked at my husband, he goes, oh my gosh, that's a heart. So like, it's that we have them everywhere, just the craziest little signs. We had out here in Arizona, there's tarantulas. There was even a tarantula hole in the shape of a heart. I mean, just comical things. And I'm like, okay, I got you. So ask your loved ones for signs and pay attention, because what might be a sign for you wouldn't be the same sign for me, right? Like if I knew that, your loved one loved fishing, you might see like fish signs all over the place or things like that. Ask and you will receive, because they really want you to know that they're okay.
Yeah.
They just transition to a different level. I talk about it like a frequency, right? Like we have to vibrate up and they have to come down to communicate with us. So I say it's kind of like a TV. They're on a different channel. And that channel's, that movie's going on the other channel, but you're watching this channel. So
Mhm.
they're right there. So
Yeah.
just, keep that in mind. I just wanted your listeners to hear that.
I love that. And thank you so much for bringing that up, because I think that's so important. And it's our openness to the idea that they're trying to communicate with us that allows them to communicate with us. I've had so many experiences like this, but I was working with a client one day, and it was almost like, and his son had transitioned not long before that. It had only been a few months, and he was feeling his son around, but he was doubting it. And the visual they showed me, it was like the cloud of grief was around him, and every once in a while that cloud would open and he would feel his son. But then when the cloud would close again around him, that grief would close again around him, then he would start doubting. And so it's just allowing ourselves to be willing to believe,
And I
really.
think once they do that, right, I think it's like you open up It's like turning on a hose and you can't shut it off. Because I have a funny little story. We were having a garage sale trying to get rid of some stuff after living here for 13 years. And I had 3 families this weekend that were at my house doing these garage sales. And my neighbor came up to me that just had bought her home a few streets down. And she looked at me and she was like, oh, I thought I overheard, because I was talking to my friend on the porch and we were talking about mediumship. And she goes, did I hear that you're a medium? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, I heard, but I heard you lost your son and he's talking to you. And I said, yes. She goes, I lost my son, my only child. And I was like, okay, what are the chances that you're right down the road and I lost a child and you lost a child? And so she's
And
like, oh,
that she overheard that conversation. That was important for
exactly.
her to overhear. Yeah.
Yep. And then there was another lady shopping around at the garage sale, and I kept seeing her looking and staring at us. And I was like, what is she looking at? And everyone coming, hi, how are you? And it's a beautiful day, normal talk. And she came up to the porch and she looked at me and she goes, I'm sorry, I overheard you talking to that other lady. And I'm like, yeah. She's like, my daughter's on the streets. I don't know if she's going to make it. And with the drug addiction. And I looked at her and I could just see the pain in her face.
Mm.
And she just started bawling. And I just reached out and gave her a hug. And my other friend that was there at the sale, she's like, Lisa, you're having this sale to connect with these ladies.
Wow.
And I just felt like, okay, what are the two chances that one lady hears the other lady and then hears my conversation and they're there at that time, because I was in and out of the house and doing other things.
Right.
And that's when you start to realize, when you open yourself up, okay, that was meant to be for me to connect to those ladies and help them, because they're both in very deep grief. So just, that's what I just wanted to share with you, because I feel like once you turn on that hose, boy, it just opens up.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Before we close, is there anything else you want to share before we go?
Um, just one thing I would like to say is, for all the listeners, our world is so busy, right? And we are all busy human beings. And one thing I had to learn with the loss of losing my son here and on this earth is that slow down a little bit, meditate, take care of yourself. If you have a loss, if this resonates with any of your listeners, when you in that quiet moment is when you will hear. One of the things I love that Suzanne Giesman talks about in one of her classes is, which I think about all the time. If I'm anxious or if I'm busy and like, well, right now we're getting ready to go on vacation and I'm like going all over the place, as you know. And I always slow down and I say, what do I need to know right now?
Mm.
I don't know if you've ever heard her say that, but she's like, what do I need to know right now? And I sit and I have an infrared sauna there behind me. That was Jared's. He used that as part of his detoxing from cancer. A lot of times I'll get on that in the morning and I'll just sit and just say, give yourself an hour. What do I need to know right now? And you'd be surprised what would come up, and listen to that, because our ego mind is like, nah, it's just kind of like, oh, you're not hearing your loved one. You have to get out of that ego. And you always have to, am I making a decision because of my ego, or am I making it because of my heart? And that's one thing that really, I base so many decisions in my life, like you. I'm older. And so I'm like, why did I do that? Well, I did that because my ego was telling me, pay the bills, do this, do that. There wasn't a lot of decisions that I thought about, and it was here. And I just think our world is so busy. It's important to take that time,
I
take
love
that
that.
time to slow down.
Yeah. And that's, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it's one of the questions I love to ask all my guests is, how do you stay connected on a daily or weekly basis to the divine, to the spirit, to your spirituality? And so is there anything you'd like to add? Because I love what you shared about just asking that question, what do I need to know today? It's actually the way that I journaled for many years. What do I need to know today? And then just kind of that automatic writing. So I'm just curious if there's anything else you would add to how you stay connected.
Well, it's a funny story, because I never meditated before we started like class. I'm not really a big meditator, but like you do it in class, right? And it's funny because my son always wanted me to meditate, and he's like, Mom, and I'm like, I feel like my sock is bothering me. I'm twitching my hands. So I do need to improve still on meditating, but I do that. Um, you know, other things I do to stay connected to Jared and spirit, it's hard for me because, and you know this story, Julie, that when I first started doing mediumship, Jared would bring the people through. So I would see him subjectively in my mind, and he would push the people through, and he would be like, "This one, mom," and I would see a person come through. Halfway through our class, I think it was in August, he stopped doing that, and it freaked me out. I didn't think I was going to see him anymore. But he has since told me that, he's my gatekeeper. However, I have to learn to connect to spirit. So I had to learn a whole new thing. So when I was going through that transition, I was looking, how am I going to still practice? Am I going to practice this anymore? Because I think I got into this because I wanted to hear from my son every day. I mean, who wouldn't, right?
Right.
And when I wasn't hearing from him, like I said to my husband, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. So I had to reach out more spiritually to really dig deep. And so things I would suggest people connect with nature. I love my morning walks. I try to walk as soon as the sun comes up. Now I can in Arizona because it's gotten a little cooler. And I like to do the sunrise. So, getting yourself into nature, slowing down. I have a porch swing in the back that I just sit, and we have chickens, and I listen to the chickens and watch the birds and things like that. Because when you become more present, and I think people are always, the next thing, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? So when you become more present, and I think that's what Jared has taught me, is to just become more present. And, little things that help me connect to spirit is what helps me connect to him. So he's got his phone. We have his phone. And I put on his Spotify, and when I clean the house, I dance to his music. And, we know Mavis Patilla, right? One of our teachers, how does she connect to spirit? She has a theme song, right? Before she goes on stage and stuff, or before she did, she had a theme song. So I was thinking about like, oh, what song do I like to play to kind of before my readings? So I have a few different songs that were Jared's that I play. And it kind of gets me into the power, and connect to spirit, because Suzanne Giesemann talks about this. This is only one moment in time, so people take life so seriously, and they're like, oh, I'm going through a bad time. I have all these health ailments, it's only one moment in time. This is such a short blip that we're here before we go there, that I always remember that. And that helps me connect to spirit too. I mean, we all have bad days. And I'm just like, Lisa, this is just get through this day. Tomorrow's a new day. So yeah, I think, all those suggestions anybody can do, even if they don't feel they're spiritual. Go for a walk in the morning, slow down, have a cup of coffee on the porch, talk to your loved ones. I had a lady reach out to me. I was doing an expo with one of my friends who's a medium, and she said, but what if I don't have anybody on the other side? Who would I talk to? I said, you have guardian angels, you have spirit guides, because she was asking for a reading and who would she connect with. And, there's a message from your spirit guides. So they're there to guide you on your life journey, right? So
I love that. Thank you so much for being here today and sharing your story and sharing your amazing experiences and hard things and the amazing things that have come out of the hard. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Julie. Thanks for having me.